My name is Rivca Rubin.
And mine is Charles Lauder.
We've been doing this we've just discovered 9 years, and we've got 2 more guests with us. This is part 2 of the very first recording of Upwording with Visual.
Because we've done some podcasts.
9 of them.
Nine?
9.
Wow.
And by the time that you see this, they may even be released on the website. So you just go to Upwording and good luck. We'll cross our fingers, they'll all be there.
Oh, we can do better than cross fingers. We're going to trust, are we not?
They will be there.
Yeah.
They will be there.
Yeah.
So Upwording is a practice. We decided that at some point.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, it was a glimmer of an idea from yours. I've said to people in the past that it's your brainchild, and I became surrogate father.
That's the first I've heard of that one. Am I mummy then?
You can choose. I would not label you. It's for you to determine who you are. Okay. And it's a practice, and part of the reason that we refer to it as a practice is because we have no intention for it to be or to appear didactic.
It's not a dogma.
No.
It's not a do these 7 things and your life will be amazing, but you must do them.
Yes, it's especially not you must do them, as we'll come to. It's about a recognition and a discussion that we had about the habitual use of language and the way in which certain expressions implied or indeed stated a sense of hierarchy, coercion, that somehow, and we do it to ourselves as well as speaking to others. So that whole thing of what's going on internally when I say, I must call my mum. What's going on when I say, oh yeah, I need to tell the kids to whatever.
So essentially, because you can see a lot more in part 1, there's a lot more detail around it, but just in a nutshell, the way we may communicate with ourselves and each other and in groups may not serve us as well as it could in terms of making connection, in terms of our health, in terms of our general being in life is what people sort of been talking about. So I'm wondering if we can bring you in. You're part of currently Islington Mill Art Academy, and you also have a studio as it's Islington Mill anyway. Let's go to you. What's your name?
My name is Simon Buckley. I'm also known as the artist Not Quite Light, which feels ridiculous as I say it, but I have a project which requires me to go out in the half light of dawn and dusk and photograph and film and record the city. And I look at themes of regeneration and transition. And in many ways, the project is a state of mind, I think. It's that unknown place which we sit in at the edge of dreams, I guess.
So that says I'm not quite light.
Not quite light, yeah.
And your name and what do you do?
So I'm Russel J.Lindley, and I'm an oil painter. I'm also a poet and a songwriter.
When did you come across Upwording?
So it was a workshop that you ran for the Islington Mill Art Academy. The Upwording workshop that was my first encounter.
I think it's about 8-9 weeks ago, isn't it?
Yeah, but yes, it's been a couple of months now. Yeah, it was quite near the start of the 12-week Art Academy period.
And from that workshop, what do you remember made an impact, or you took with you, or noticed?
From that workshop, I mean, I started noticing how that sort of the coercion, the hierarchy, infiltrated my thought processes, my interactions with other people. And from noticing that, I kept thinking about that after that workshop. For how it's a sort of invitation to observe how these words come into your mind and into your speech.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because that's the thing that we habitually say, and I use the word deliberately in this instance, that it's the noticing is so much of it. Because without the noticing, then you don't move to what we refer to as the practice. And that's part of the reason we always refer to Upwording as a practice rather than any of those other things. We're not teaching. We're not desperately seeking to change. We're offering the opportunity to reconsider, to shift, and to see how that impacts on, as Rivca said, to what extent do you arrive at a more beneficial communication?
And for me, there is a change that is an absolute desire, and that is not to go, I must, you must, we must change. It's more that if we choose to make some shifts in our everyday habitual language, which generally is taught, we don't necessarily even notice. That for me, what we may not notice is that inadvertently we're upholding systems of, and I'm going to use the word superiority, slightly different to necessarily hierarchy, when actually we may not wish to engage in them any longer. We may wish to actively dismantle them. Certainly we may have suffered as a result of them. And what I just mean by superiority is I know better than you, I'm worth more than you, therefore I can tell you, I can evaluate you, I can frame you, I can blame you. Whereas hierarchy may be present in something in terms of the level of responsibility I may have taken on for the security or safety or legal operations of an organization, let's say. It doesn't require, in my opinion, I think in yours too, if I know this, I'm not speaking for you, we've had so many conversations that at no point does that, I think, permit, allow, facilitate or require a communication where one person puts themselves above another. Simon, how did you come across Upwording?
Well, this particular path was the same as Russell, and I came to the workshop. However, I think I came across it without knowing many years ago, and I became particularly aware after, on a very personal level, after a marriage broke up. And you're very intense when you're in pain, aren't you? It's kind of like dropping some kind of strange drug. And I became really aware of the word should. And I began to dismantle it. So I used the phrase qualify and quantify whenever I found myself saying the word should. So I think I've been aware of it for quite some time. And as a self-employed person, a freelance person, I'm quite often receiving well-meant and loving advice, but which is prefaced with what you should do. And so I'm very, I've spent years having people sort of start their conversation, often not freelancers, of course, So this particular path recently, but actually I think I've had an awareness for quite a bit longer. And once I'd been opened up to that idea, I realized it had actually begun in my childhood, and an awful lot of the things you spend your adult life trying to unravel came from those early years when your mother is determining what is the correct way to behave and what is not, in her humble opinion.
That's an interesting thing, that I'd had encountered this concept, I think, in a sort of therapy context, of avoiding the word should. But I think that Upwording, one of the takeaways from that is I understood the why and the how of how you identifying that use of language, and understanding what that's doing, and thinking to yourself, how would I rather do it, rather than it can just become another should. I should stop saying should. Yeah. And I think that when I did the Upwording workshop, it sort of made it click for me, the reason why we change it. It's not just about changing the language. It's not just about getting rid of the word should. There's no hidden should. It's really about the intention. Yeah. That's one of the main things I learned from that workshop.
Yeah, and I think when I said earlier about not wanting to change, I think what I was getting at was not to impose change. So what I would say instead is that what we're looking for are changed outcomes. So that by shifting the way we engage with language, we end up in a place where communication is much more harmonious. And almost by definition, that means certain things will change. Some of the conflicts might be less abrasive. I think almost by definition, there is likely to be conflict as differing perspectives and different views come into place. Or at least there's likely to be friction, if not conflict. And so what we're looking at is, how do you, when that occurs, and this is what I think is quite interesting, that it's not just about noticing at that point then, it's so what might be done about it. So we look at what are the words that might be used if we're not going to use should, if we're not going to use must, if we're not going to use need.
So what have you been using instead?
Well, so for me, it's when I notice this, I should or you should about to come into my head or come into the words I say out loud, I think to myself, what's the reason behind it? And start from there instead. So rather than you should do something that way, you should paint in this way, you think to yourself, what is the reason, what's the benefit from that? And then you can just skip all the should and go straight to, if you do it this way, then this will be, I think that it will help you in this way. This will be your outcome. And so you're not thinking in your day-to-day anymore about this is, I have to do it this way, but sort of invisibly kind of piles on this sense of obligation. You're instead thinking in terms of, this is what I value. This is the consequence of what I'm doing.
It's interesting because that reminds me of the imagery, which is the one of being shackled. That whole sense of, and again, I guess it's coercion, because something else is holding you down, is holding you to a way of being, a way of speaking, and as you said, look at it differently and freedom.
And that way was, you mentioned your mother, the right way.
Yeah, she was brought up, I think, by somebody who had a very clear idea of what she considered to be the right way and imposed that upon my mother, and then subsequently that arrived at me. I remember, for instance, when I was a teenager, New Romantics time was in, so I wore makeup, and that clearly conflicted with my mum's sense of the right way to be, and so that caused conflict, and quite often it was this should thing that came. And I hear the word should like an arrow thudding into a target, should, it feels like an arrival. It's almost like a painful arrival, I think. So that thing you've said about qualify and quantify, I try and break that down, but it often feels a very confining word.
Because the should has got that extra morality to it, the moral of what is right and also what is wrong, what is normal, what is abnormal. So also I find that the should, the arrow, is full of the right way, and I know the right way if I'm speaking it out to somebody. I haven't yet actually met anybody who feels that the way they're saying something is the wrong way.
Right.
There is something, sadly, that if I'm going to say something, I'll be convinced by what I say or what I suggest, even without a should. And maybe if we can accept that there isn't an absolute right or wrong, and it changes with, did you say, even fashion and generation and decades, cultures, countries, etc., that we could go more to what we call a multifarious. So there isn't the one right way, and maybe there's not even the right way. There are ways. There are different ways and different views. And if we then go to the intention of seeking to connect with others, they could all coexist in a colleague of ours then called it, I think, sort of like a 3D sphere where there's lots of crossovers, cross sections, where I can connect with somebody whilst I may not at all agree with some of the other things they choose to believe in at that moment in their lives.
So should was the specific term that resonated. Was there any particular one of the words that we engage with in Upwording that resonated with you?
In terms of the must, the need, the have to, got to.
For me, for example, one of the things that I don't think we touched on this in the previous one, was but and. Because that's one of my favourites, which is, and when I'm introducing people to Upwording without it being an Upwording workshop sort of thing, I kind of go, very, very quick way of getting engaged with it is say something and then hear a but after it. And what follows thereafter is, and I use this term, is received entirely as a rebuttal. You could say pretty much the same words after and I invite people to play that game with themselves and see how it lands. The same words land differently if they have followed and rather than a but.
And it can take a bit of time, because internally I might actually not agree, because I have got this is wrong. So a friend of mine once, she said to something, I said, yeah, I agree with you, but. And I went, okay, let's pause for a minute. Do you actually agree? And she thought, after a while, it's like, no, I don't. So then I might as well go, I actually don't agree with you, and go straight to the point. So I'm wondering about the Islington Mill Art Academy, of which you are both part of. You've been joining on some of the, I think, Wednesdays in particular.
The Wednesdays, yeah.
And also the WOW feedback. You're quite a core group. Me too. We're there a lot, into the night, the morning, and beyond. I think, Russell, I've noticed that there is quite an absence of but.
Yeah, it reminds me of doing improv exercises where there's when you're trying to foster creativity, you say yes and, right? You start with your premise, and then you build on that with and. The but comes later when you're editing it and refining it and all that sort of thing. You can start thinking about the but when you're there in the thick of it, when you're in the collaboration, when you're in the encouragement, which I think is really where we like to keep things in the Art Academy. That's where we say yes and.
So it adds to.
Yeah.
And things roll, and they may have traction.
Yeah.
Collaboration comes, or they might just not happen. And it's not about having coded them into right, wrong, good or bad, or better or worse. They just may not have traction with those people at those time. And that idea may come in a different form. I'm wondering about the but later. And I was just thinking, because I choose to really avoid the but, unless it is after something that's negative. I woke up this morning, I didn't feel great. But then the sun came out and I felt much happier. And at that moment, it puts less focus or value, like you said, on the first bit. So at that moment, the but can work, because it will put focus on the second one. I'm thinking about the later but, and I wonder what happens if even then we go, how about?
Yeah.
Going this way or doing it that way, or a different way. Let's explore.
Yeah, I also think that sometimes it's a desire, for whatever reason, to link things that need not necessarily be linked. You said, I'm now going to say, so there's no requirement for me to say yes, but.
It separates.
They're separate, and so they hold their own space quite legitimately. A decision can then be made as to whether one moves in one direction or whether you seek to bring them together. I think the starting point of absolutely anchoring them together can sometimes get in the way of communication.
And I know that I've heard people go, yes, and sometimes I really want to use the but. Sometimes the but is the thing. What I've noticed doing facilitation and mediation, especially around facilitating conversations between groups of people, regardless of what the conversation is about, the moment a but lands in the room, it costs quite a bit of time. Because somebody comes up, for instance, with an idea and going, oh, how about we do that?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better if? But I think that would be better. So even the unspoken but, the implied but, my God, it costs a lot, because the person who's given the original idea suddenly feels, oh, so your idea is better, or my idea is not good enough. So it can do a number of things, which is that person may shy away and not offer anything anymore after even just one time, or there is a battle,
They dig
the but battle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think it would be the right way to do it, because, but I've been here longer and I think it must be done in that way. So we're going back to what you were just saying before, all the musts and need tos and have tos and got tos.
Yeah, well, I suppose the but is the end of something, the butt of the ship or whatever. That's the end. So when you bring that into a conversation, then that's the stopping force. You're moving forward. With the and, with the that reminds me of, with the also, you reach the but, and that's the slowing force. And sometimes maybe that stopping force can have its uses. If there's a risk, for example, you might want to bring that in. But if you're wanting to keep the flow of it going, then maybe bringing the but into it.
And that is really actually the upwording practice in the sense promotes a flow, it promotes connecting, it promotes very much curiosity, which is so crucial at the moment. I mean, I think it's crucial at all times, but in particular now where there's even more divisiveness, it's very quick to jump. I think we know so much over the last decades about the impact of phrases and words and communication on ourselves and each other, and yet we've become, it seems, more divisive, really quick to jump to where do you sit, where do you stand, what's your opinion, and there are only two. One is over there and one is over there, and they're so far apart they can't even hear each other anymore.
So where do you think how much importance is there for empathy and kindness in this, to actually be able to practice it?
Well, one of the things I use, and I encourage other people to, is how do you keep the conversation going? If you maintain that as, we want to keep talking, there's a fabulous, is it Stephen Hawking's voice on the Pink Floyd track? All we've got to do is keep talking. And I think if we start with that perspective, because as you said, but becomes a roadblock. So and this is why I like the furious to curious, which is that thing that if you're settled in your furious, then you're there and you're anchored and you will defend that. If you flip that over to curious, then straight away you're actually saying, you're inviting. Rather than me, it must be this, it must be that. It's like, okay, what would you like? What's it like from your perspective? That's the means by which, when I say, how do you keep the conversation going? And people who talk about how to network and what have you, one of the things they consistently say is, get the other person to talk about themselves. And if you do that, then you won't find yourself so married to or desirous of the, I'm right.
It's interesting that it was which way, this is like the chicken and egg almost for me with upwording, because some people have the desire to make life more comfortable around them and to do those positive things, and others may only be able to get to that by perhaps starting with upwording and understanding what that can then bring them once they begin to put it into practice. It's kind of interesting that it could come from two separate directions and end up in the same place.
Hence the practice.
Absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up, because that in there is the intention. It is the intention that drives. And non-violent communication, which is where essentially a lot of this is absolutely based on, and I would say upwarding comes out of non-violent communication and understanding of other change approaches, is if you actually always check what your intention is, the words will follow. There may be a must in there, but it'll have a different intention. It might be, God, I saw this film yesterday, I absolutely love it, you all must see it. That's an invitation. So it's not just in the must, the word itself, it's what drives it, you know. The reason for upwording, and yes, it was 2016, I thought, so many people do not have the means, the money, the time, the possibility to go on long courses, and still nonviolent communication is quite a sizable chunk of time in order to really understand and work on intention. So that's sort of the inside out, and then the language, of course, absolutely follows. So I thought, is there another way that we could get to that understanding, realization quicker? And that is then therefore upwording says, let's just notice when those words arrive in my head, to myself, in my head about others, coming out of my mouth, going onto the page, in the email, from others, and between each other. So yes, it's an outside in, inside out, and it's not just going, oh, I noticed a must, I'm going to change it to a want. I think we said in part one, that could just be a lie. I'm just trying to paint over the must and put a want there. The question mark in there is really important. And And I wanted to ask you both, you have been part of the crit group. So there is we call it the 5 crits. That's the core reading team of the very first booklet of Upwording, which focuses in particular on coercion. It does focus on exactly that, the have-tos, need-tos, must-dos, got-tos, should-dos and ought-tos. And the other booklets to follow will then look also at buts and ands, at can'ts, at generalizations, at labeling, at blaming, and at binary polarizations, good, bad, right, wrong, which we've alluded to.
As someone who's not a part of that group, I'd be fascinated to hear from you guys how you found being part of that, which bits of it that have appealed and or amused, or which are the bits that you've had a kind of visceral response to?
Visceral response.
Yeah, that whole kind of thing where you know that moment when you kind of go, yeah, I kind of like that, and then it builds into something that's more than just, oh, we were just reading this thing.
Well, I think one of the aspects of being freelance or self-employed, and maybe this links to creativity as well, is how have I ended up in this particular moment at this particular point in my life? You know, what has led me here? Is it just coincidence, and is it accident, or has there been something set off sometime previously? How did I end up taking a studio at the Mill, for instance? And it was an impulsive decision that probably began in a completely not impulsive way several months ago, perhaps. And so I think in terms of how I found it, one of the questions I asked myself was, how have I ended up in this group at this particular moment in my life? Because it's felt very apt. Being a photographer, being self-employed can be quite isolating and quite lonely at times. And this is not something I've been used to doing, sitting with a group of people, discussing a piece of work and everybody chipping in. And because what I do is I sit there and I go, this is how my work's going to be, this is how it's going to look, and then I put it out there. And so I've actually found it, quite challenging, but in a very beautiful way. And it's been a happy accident, I think, for me to be here and to listen to a piece of work being discussed in a positive way. I mean, I thought the first wow was absolutely fascinating.
And while being words of witness, which is another thing we do and co-deliver, and other parts of Upwording team do as well. And that's a way of giving feedback in service of the work, of the artists, without making any judgment at any point that is around good, bad, right, wrong, or you should do this or that. So it focuses on that. So thanks for saying that. I think the question is also within the book, what you've read within the booklet. You've been through a number of iterations and you've inputted. So you've had responses. I know that because I've actually created a whole section as a result of you saying there's something missing. And I've changed something around you going, oh, I wish I would have known that when I was
a parent. Yeah.
So please feel free to just say, what were they? What's touched you? What's resonated?
Well, I think, again, listening to the use of language, it was really interesting to have it set out as a series of characters for me. And I thought it was very amusing at times as well. I thought some lines, what was the phrase about the soap and the dishes, I found was quite amusing. And I think it felt an access point for me to be able to understand how it could work. You know, sometimes self-help books, as they become deemed, exactly, but they can be deemed as that, can be very off-putting and very prescriptive. And this didn't feel like either of those. It didn't feel like a self-help book, and it didn't feel prescriptive. It felt conversational, and it didn't feel confrontational. And I enjoyed that aspect of it very much, you know, as if it was a gentle sort of, take my hand, off we go, this is going to be great.
You'd have enjoyed some of those early conversations when we talked about what Upwording wasn't.
Was not,
Yes.
all of that. And so I'm really glad to hear that. And you've really shaped that, because at times it has had become a bit either the similar rhythm or a bit educational, still kicked into it. So we can I can remove that with your feedback.
Because as an adult, I enjoyed the fact that I was able to feel childlike reading it. I didn't feel as if I had to have a PhD to get in there and to keep rereading paragraphs. I allowed the gentle nature of it. I enjoyed that. As I say, to be childlike and to go, it's fine to relearn this stuff. And I think to some extent to unravel the brain as much as you need to start to get past all of this stuff that's actually been with us since the early weeks of our lives when our brains are coming in. you almost need to be returned to your childlike self to have any chance at all of actually beginning to unravel yourself and starting to look at how you use language differently.
It really resonated with me when you said earlier about the sense of there's a gentle way in, that it isn't, oh, I've now got to set myself this task of studying. And again, it comes back to why we say it's a practice. Because if it's taken generations to build habits, it's highly unlikely that going on your 7-week intensive course is going to change everything.
No.
There's really, and for it to be important that that's not the approach, that it isn't I must get through this from there to there to there, because at that point I will be saved and a wonderful person.
Or that it will change your life.
Yeah.
That's what we're also really moving. Yeah, Russell, what were the things that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, but in terms of just my personal journey along with the crit sessions and the Upward, and starting with that first workshop, there was a whole range of realizations that came out of it, and so some of that came with a feeling of regret, of noticing how that this sort of the coercion has entered into my thought processes and entered into my language, and how that's come out and affected my relationships with people, my interactions with people. But then it doesn't linger on that. It moves into ways that you can move on from that. And that's part of what I think it's one of the things I've enjoyed about the process of going through the crits, is having time to sort of really absorb the message of it, and to spend time with the text and spend time discussing the ideas around it. And also, like you said, to be part of that collaborative process. Again, I think especially maybe for a lot of us, what we've gained from the academy is this opportunity to collaborate with each other as artists. And I think that these crit sessions have been the epitome of that, and seeing how you've attracted the kind of feedback, the way that you've approached gaining helpful, relevant feedback from people, and the way you've responded to that feedback has been a good learning experience for me.
I know you're going to read some bits from the booklet in due course, and I also know that part of how the booklets come about is that you've used the musts and the needs and what have you to form characters. So the question that I'd want to ask, do you have a favourite character?
Well, before I answer that, one of the things around using characters, which I found interesting, is that sometimes when you overhear things on the radio or whatever, and it's some doctor or somebody delivering their self-help idea, and you can't help but hear their voice and ego, and in a way there is this hidden, I have this knowledge and you will benefit. And I feel that using the characters was very good, because actually there was no one voice determining, there was no sort of sense of, I'm going to sell you some merchandise on the back of this kind of thing. I'm going to be a YouTube star on the back of this. That was immediately taken away, because the job was handed over to these characters. And so the author, if I didn't read the top and the front of the book, I'd never have a sense of the author, even though obviously the author is within it. Actually, it was dispersed throughout these different characters. And I felt that was a really useful way of allowing me to sit with the changes that could be made.
I'm still going to pin you. Which is your character? Which is your preferred character? Is there a favourite character?
They still change names constantly at the moment. I'd be interested.
This assumes that I can remember the names of the characters in there.
All right, okay.
I did like I wasn't keen on the names, but I liked the conversation between Mac and Wanda. Yeah. I thought that was quite interesting, because early on in that conversation, it occurred to me that there were quite some profound world-changing needs in there, and I was kind of thinking, God, if world leaders, and we could kind of disseminate this in terms of how people approached, because I hadn't thought of the conversation around, say, climate change as something that held these words, and so I suddenly thought, yeah, actually, when this news is delivered to me that I read on a daily basis and that I'm committed to, but actually, yeah, they are going should. And I thought actually maybe protesters, maybe action groups could consider their use of language in terms of how we would. And so I think the Mac and Wonder conversation really allowed me to go, this is a bigger problem than I realised. Actually, this isn't just my mum talking. So this is how we shape and change societies. You know.
Wow.
Thank you. And it's exactly that, because it's such a turn off to be told what you must do. And what he was then called Mac Must, he's now called Hugo Must, and it's Clara Want.
Okay, I'll go with that.
At the moment, and they may change still their first names. That's the whole point, because he's taking climate change seriously. And he's going, but I've cranked it up. I've cranked up the urgency and the pressure. I'm telling people what they must do and now, and so on. And she goes, and is it working? And he's going, far too slow. You know.
Yeah.
So
Read that one.
yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was fascinating. The idea of considering whether the urgency might be part of what people are rebelling against.
Because often it feels like it's too big, it's too late. There's nothing I can do. I'm just one person, and so to put that pressure on means that people are not in the space of going, well, what do I want to do about it? Where is my room for making a really conscious, considered decision or choice? That's what
It takes us absolutely back to that thing, though, doesn't it? Where if it's a must, if it's a need, if it's been externalized, then the responses are rebel, resist, resign. And so
refuse.
And refuse. And it's hardly surprising that, well intended though it might be, that if it's phrased in that must do, have to, need to, it's urgent, that the very folk with whom we wish to communicate are the ones that are likely to go, well, I don't know.
Yeah. Who are you to? And why should I?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially if you're talking about something like saving the planet from environmental disaster, then you're very much coming from a position that could be seen as saying I'm taking the morally superior position, and I think that that's a real insight. The idea that people are pushing back against that,
rather than the content,
rather than
the invitation, because it's not invitation, it's a command. And I think this would be a moment to wrap up part 2. Thank you, Russell.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you for inviting me on.
And thank you particularly for the expression that so much wraps up what we're talking about, which is that words change worlds.
So narrating through this booklet is Metamorphia. Meta speaks for Upwording and will introduce you to various characters representing concepts, constructs and words and attitudes from 2 houses, the house of have to and the house of curious. They're a bit like families. Some call them family force and family free. They're not genetically related, just ideologically entangled. They're concepts, powerful ones. And their favorite trick? Wearing everyday words. First up, the advisory service, led by Sadie Should, queen of guilt-tinged encouragement and moral nudging. Her dream team, Norm Need, Gertie Gott, Wholly Have To, and of course Hugo Must, Director of Coercion and Control, famous for You Must Understand and There Is No Other Option. They're so familiar you may not notice them speaking through your mouth. You didn't invent them, you inherited them. They've been whispering scripts into your sentences for years. They moved in quietly via school books, family dinners, and the 7 Things You Must Do manuals. They thrive on urgency, certainty, and moral superiority. They serve shoulds when no one asked. They add exclamation marks to your thoughts, they run things, and they are organized.
And for those of you who've been listening / watching, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to Islington Mill, thanks to Islington Mill Art Academy, thanks to LGBTV, and everything else will be on the credits.